The Vermont fog had erased the road when Holt Calloway saw a red scarf moving beside the trees. The old woman holding it did not ask the former Navy SEAL to save her life. She asked him to find Sentry, the German shepherd who had never abandoned her. Deep in the maple woods, Holt found the dog bleeding inside a trap that someone had placed there recently. That single rescue opened a trail of midnight engines, hidden cages, and a town afraid to question the man it trusted. But Idela's final request would ask Holt to face something harder than any enemy: the fear of being needed. Tell us where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, please like and subscribe to help us reach 10,000 subscribers and keep these stories alive. By 7:30, Hartwell Ridge had disappeared. The road was still there, of course, curling through the northern Vermont hills exactly where it had curled for generations. But the October fog had swallowed its edges, its ditches, and most of the maple forest beyond. Yellow leaves drifted out of the whiteness, struck the windshield of Holt Calloway's old Ford, and vanished over the roof like small, exhausted birds. Holt drove with both hands on the wheel. His physical therapy appointment was at 8:15. The folded reminder card had been sitting in the cup holder for 9 days, gathering coffee rings while he invented increasingly practical reasons not to go. The truck needed an oil change. The north gutter had come loose. The woodpile was leaning. All true. None of them the reason. His lower back had been burning since before dawn, a slow iron pressure around the place where an old fragment still rested too close to his spine. The Veterans Clinic called it chronic nerve irritation. Holt called it weather. He shifted carefully in the seat. Beneath his waxed jacket, the olive-drab body of his combat shirt fit close against his torso, while the camouflage sleeves bore faint horizontal bands at the upper arms. He had worn variations of the same shirt for years, not from nostalgia, he told himself, but because it was durable. The lie had become comfortable with age. He had chosen Hartwell Ridge because it curved around Alder Hollow, rather than through it. The route added 12 minutes, but spared him the cafe windows, the hardware store, and the possibility of someone raising a hand and asking how he had been. At the third bend, something red moved in the fog. Holt eased off the accelerator. The shape appeared again, low and uncertain. Not a road sign, not a deer marker, a scarf. A small woman stood beyond the white shoulder line, one hand braced against a leaning mailbox post while the other waved a red wool scarf above her head. She was not in the lane, but she was close enough that a driver moving too quickly might see her only after passing. Holt stopped 20 feet beyond her and put the truck in park. For a moment, he stayed behind the wheel. The clinic clock continued without him. Then the woman's knees bent. Holt was outside before she fell. He reached her in several long strides, though the last one sent a warning pull across his lower back. She was slight, perhaps 5'2", wrapped in a navy wool coat that looked heavier than she did. Silver-white hair had escaped from a low bun and clung damply to her temples. Thin, metal-framed glasses sat crooked on her pale face. "Easy," Holt said, taking her elbow without gripping too hard. "I am being easy," she replied, breathless but indignant. "This is what easy looks like at 79. The answer was sharp enough to reassure him slightly. Her green-gray eyes were clear, her breathing was not. "Are you hurt?" "No." "You're having trouble breathing." "I'm old. It happens." "That isn't an answer." "It is where I come from." Holt glanced toward the nearest house, but the fog concealed everything beyond the mailbox and a narrow gravel track. "I can take you to the clinic." "No." "The hospital, then?" "No." Her fingers closed around his sleeve. They were cold and surprisingly firm. "Please," she whispered. "Save my dog." The words changed something in her face. The stubbornness remained, but beneath it Holt saw the raw edge of fear. "What happened?" "Sentry went out last night and didn't come back." "What kind of dog?" "German shepherd, 7 years old, golden black coat, not the sort to wander. Holt looked toward the forest. Rain had fallen heavily through the night, and the ground beneath the maples would be slick. Fog pooled between the trunks like smoke trapped close to earth. "Did you call anyone?" "The landline went dead after the storm. There's no cell signal at the house. I tried the road." "How long have you been standing here?" She avoided his eyes. "How long?" "Long enough to learn that people in heated cars become philosophers about someone else's emergency." Despite himself, Holt almost smiled. The woman lifted the scarf again as though preparing to flag down another vehicle. He lowered her arm. "My name is Holt Calloway." "Idella Hartwell." The name fit the road, the mailbox, and perhaps half the ridge. Holt took his phone from his pocket. No signal. "I have a radio in the truck," he said. "I'll contact dispatch. Search and rescue can—" "No." Her grip tightened. "Not yet." "Mrs. Hartwell." "I heard him before dawn." Holt stopped. "He was far back in the woods," she continued. "One bark, then another. After that, nothing." "You went looking?" Her silence answered first. Holt noticed the scratches across her wrist, thin lines darkened by rainwater. Mud marked the hem of her charcoal skirt. One shoe was caked with wet leaves. "How far?" "Only to the first trail marker, my chest." She pressed her palm lightly beneath her collarbone, then removed it as if ashamed of the admission. "I had to turn back." In her other hand, partly hidden by the red scarf, she held a small brass dog whistle. The metal had been polished smooth where countless fingers had touched it. A narrow crack ran along one edge. "Arthur's," Idella said when she saw Holt looking. "My husband's. Sentry always comes to it." "Always?" "Until today." Holt looked through the windshield of his truck. The appointment card remained visible in the cup holder, a pale rectangle representing an hour he had promised to give to his own body. He imagined driving away. He imagined the old woman standing beside the mailbox again, lifting the red scarf into the fog until her arm failed. Holt opened the passenger door. "Get in." Idella studied him. "You're going to help?" "I'm going to look. That is not the same as promising I'll find him." "No," she said, climbing into the cab with more dignity than strength. "But it is how promises usually begin." Her house stood less than a quarter-mile down the gravel track, an old white clapboard place beneath towering maples. A brass lamp burned over the porch, even though morning had come. The yard was neat but tired. Firewood had been stacked beneath a tarp, one corner of which had torn loose and flapped weakly in the damp air. Holt parked near the porch. Idella was already reaching for the door handle. "You stay here." "This is my house." "You can supervise from the porch." "I supervised postal workers for 40 years, Mr. Calloway. They grew to resent the word." He ignored that and walked around the house. Behind the kitchen steps, the yard sloped toward a narrow path between the trees. The rain had softened the earth enough to preserve tracks. Holt crouched slowly, one knee lowered, careful not to let his back fold too far. The paw prints were large and clean at first. German shepherd. The stride suggested purpose rather than wandering. Sentry had left the yard at speed, moving toward the old woods road. 40 feet farther, the pattern changed. The impressions deepened. One set veered sharply left, then doubled back. Holt found a broken fern, then a smear of mud, then blood, only a few drops, nearly black against a yellow maple leaf. Behind him, Idella inhaled. He turned. She had not remained on the porch. "I asked you to stay back." "And I declined." Her face had gone paler, but she was standing. Holt stared at her for a moment. He had once commanded men who followed impossible instructions under fire. Idella Hartwell, he suspected, would have argued with each one. He returned to the truck and opened the toolbox behind the cab. From it, he took a length of tow rope, a compact tool roll, heavy cutters, and an old gray blanket. After a hesitation, he removed the black support brace he kept beneath the passenger seat. Idella watched him fasten it around his waist. "You were going to a doctor," she said. "Physical therapist." "And you were planning to arrive late?" "I was planning to arrive." "Those are different things." Holt pulled his jacket closed. "You ask a lot of questions for someone ignoring every instruction I give." "You give a lot of instructions for someone who has known me 7 minutes." He handed her the brass whistle. "Stay where I can see you." That was the compromise. They entered the forest together. The trail narrowed quickly beneath wet branches. Maples flamed red and orange overhead, though the fog drained the brightness from them. Water tapped from leaf to leaf. Somewhere farther downhill, a creek moved unseen over stone. Idella walked with one hand on a crooked maple branch Holt had cut into a temporary cane. She did not complain, but her breath shortened after every incline. At the first trail marker, a faded blue blaze on a white birch, Holt stopped her. "No farther." "I need him to hear me." "You can use the whistle from here." "If he is hurt, he will be frightened." "And if you collapse, I will have 2 people to carry." "Sentry is not a person." Holt looked back at her. Idella's mouth tightened. "He would disagree." The old woman raised Arthur's whistle and blew. The sound was thin, almost delicate, but it traveled through the wet trees farther than Holt expected. Nothing answered. Idella blew again. Still nothing. Holt moved forward alone, leaving her beside the birch. Every 20 paces he glanced back and saw the red scarf at her throat, the only warm color in the gray woods. The tracks continued across the old logging road where tire ruts had collected brown water. Sentry's prints became erratic near a stand of hemlock. One rear paw had begun dragging. The blood drops came closer together. Holt felt his senses narrowing, not into fear, but into the old quiet that arrived when details mattered. Broken twig, disturbed moss, fresh scrape on stone. The forest rearranged itself into evidence. Then he found the fox. It lay beneath a young maple, caught by a wire loop around one hind leg. The animal was dead, its red fur soaked dark by rain. The cable had been anchored beneath leaves and pulled tight with a locking device. Holt crouched without touching it. The steel was too clean. The cut end shone silver where rain had not yet dulled it. Not abandoned, not old. Behind him came the faint scrape of Idella's makeshift cane. He turned sharply. "I told you, I heard something." Holt listened. At first, there was only water dripping and Idella's uneven breathing. Then, from somewhere downslope, came a low sound. Not a bark. A groan. Idella's face changed so completely that Holt felt it like a hand against his chest. "Sentry!" She tried to pass him. Holt caught her gently by both shoulders. "Stay behind me." This time, she obeyed. They followed the sound toward a depression hidden beneath ferns and fallen leaves. The land dropped suddenly where an old quarry pit had collapsed decades earlier. Rain had turned the rim into sliding mud. Holt went down on one knee near the edge and brushed aside wet leaves. Below, perhaps 8 feet deep, something moved. A black muzzle lifted from the shadows. The dog was larger than Holt had expected, golden black beneath the mud, with a broad saddle marking across his back and a dark mane around his neck. One ear stood erect. The other carried a clean V-shaped notch along its outer edge. Amber eyes fixed on Holt. Sentry's rear leg was wrapped in wire. Mud and blood darkened the fur above the paw. The slope behind him had caved in, trapping his body between loose stone and the pit wall. Idella made a sound that was not quite his name and not quite a prayer. Sentry tried to rise. The wire tightened. His lips drew back from his teeth. "Easy," Holt murmured, though he was not sure whether he meant the dog, the woman, or himself. He reached for the tow rope. Pain seized his lower back in one bright, ruthless line. His left leg weakened, and for half a second the forest tilted around him. Holt caught himself against the wet ground. Below, Sentry's growl deepened. Above him, Idella clutched the red scarf in one hand and Arthur's whistle in the other. Holt looked into the pit, at the wounded dog who did not know him and had no reason to trust him. Then he began planning the descent. Holt did not climb into the pit at once. The dog below him was frightened, injured, and large enough to break a man's wrist before pain allowed reason to enter the room. Experience had taught Holt that courage was often just impatience wearing a cleaner uniform. He lowered himself near the rim, keeping his body turned slightly sideways. Sentry watched every movement. Mud clung to the German shepherd's golden-black coat, dulling the dark saddle across his back. His right hind leg lay twisted beneath him, held by a wire loop that disappeared into the leaves and loose stone. The V-shaped notch in his left ear made the animal look battle-marked, even in defeat. "Easy," Holt said. Sentry's growl did not soften. "That makes two of us." Behind Holt, Idella knelt as far as her stiff joints allowed. Her breathing remained too shallow, but the moment she saw the dog, she seemed to forget her own weakness. "Sentry," she called, "look at me." One black ear shifted. Down. The dog's chest lowered a fraction. Holt noticed it immediately. Sentry was still listening. Fear had not entirely displaced training. "Again," Holt said. Idella drew a breath that shook on the way in. "Sentry, down, stay." The dog's forelegs folded beneath him. His lips still curled away from his teeth, but the growl fell into a low vibration. Holt secured one end of the tow rope around a thick maple trunk. He tested the knot twice, then eased himself over the edge, boots searching for purchase in the mud. His back protested before he had descended 3 feet. He ignored it. The pit smelled of wet earth, blood, and animal fear. The fox lay partly hidden beneath leaves near the far wall. Its hind leg remained caught in another wire loop. Sentry had likely heard it struggling from the house and followed the sound into the woods. Holt reached the bottom and stopped several feet from the dog. Sentry's eyes locked on the cutters at Holt's belt. "No one likes the tools," Holt murmured. He took the old gray blanket and unfolded it slowly. It was not thick enough to stop a determined bite, but it could give him a moment if Sentry panicked. "Idella, keep talking." "What should I say?" "Anything he knows." For the first time that morning, the old woman hesitated. Then she began telling Sentry about breakfast. She described the eggs he had missed, the piece of toast he was not supposed to receive, and the strip of bacon she would deny giving him if Nathan Pierce ever asked. Her voice was unsteady at first, then found its familiar rhythm. Sentry's breathing changed. Holt advanced by inches. The dog flinched when the blanket touched his shoulder, but Idella gave the stay command again. Holt draped the fabric across Sentry's neck and part of his head, leaving the muzzle free but narrowing what the animal could see. The wire had cut through fur and tightened above the paw. Holt did not examine the wound longer than necessary. The immediate danger was the pressure. Everything else could wait for a veterinarian. He slid the cutters beneath the cable. Sentry snapped once at the air. Holt froze. Above them, Idella stopped speaking. "Keep going," Holt said quietly. She resumed the story, now describing Arthur's habit of burning pancakes on Sundays. Apparently, the late Mr. Hartwell had insisted smoke made them taste outdoorsy. The absurdity of it helped. Holt's shoulders loosened by a degree. He closed the cutters. The cable resisted. He adjusted the angle and squeezed again. A sharp metallic crack sounded through the pit. Sentry jerked. The severed wire sprang loose, scraping Holt's glove. The dog tried to rise, but the movement sent him sideways against the wall. "Stay down," Holt said, more firmly now. Sentry bared his teeth. Then something unexpected happened. The dog looked past Holt toward Idella and obeyed. Holt removed the remaining loose turns of wire without pulling at the damaged leg. He checked the paw for warmth and found it. That was something. His back seized when he leaned too far forward. Pain traveled from his spine into his left hip, then down the leg in a bright electric line. His knee folded. Holt caught himself against the mud before falling onto Sentry. The German Shepherd lunged halfway up. Idella cried out, but Sentry did not bite. Instead, he thrust his shoulder beneath Holt's forearm and held there, trembling with pain. For a strange second, man and dog leaned against each other simply because neither could remain upright alone. Holt recovered first. "You have poor judgment," he told Sentry. The dog's ears tilted unevenly. Holt looped the tow rope beneath the blanket, creating a broad sling around the dog's chest and abdomen. He left the injured leg free and patted the rope with folded fabric. Then he heard an engine beyond the trees, not on the old road below them. Closer. A door slammed. "Calloway?" The voice belonged to a woman. "Down here," Holt answered. Branches moved above the rim, and a figure in a dark forest-green field jacket appeared beside Idella. She was younger than Holt expected, perhaps not yet 30, with dark brown hair tied low at the back of her neck. A faint scar cut across the skin above her left eyebrow. A radio rested at her shoulder, and an orange field notebook protruded from one pocket. Mara Bell took in the pit, the dog, the dead fox, and Holt's position in a single glance. "You always make your first meeting with a ranger this complicated?" she asked. "I try to set expectations early." Mara did not smile, but the corner of her mouth considered it. She had received Holt's brief radio transmission from the truck before he entered the forest. Dispatch had been handling a collision on the state road, so Mara, patrolling a nearby conservation tract, had responded herself. She lowered a compact pack into the pit. "Soft stretcher," she said. "Can you position it?" "Yes." "Can you climb back out after?" Holt looked at his left leg. "Probably." That was not convincing. It wasn't intended to be. Together they worked the stretcher beneath Sentry. Idella continued issuing quiet commands from above. Each time the dog's fear rose, her voice drew it back. Mara descended far enough to help guide the injured leg. Unlike Holt, she did not speak to Sentry as though trying to persuade him. She moved with precise patience and let her hands explain her intentions before they touched him. Once the dog was secured, they hauled slowly. Sentry growled when the stretcher lifted, but he did not struggle. Holt climbed behind it, using the rope and exposed roots to pull himself upward. His left foot slipped twice. The second time, Mara caught the back of his belt. "I had it," he said. "You had gravity." At the top, Idella dropped beside Sentry. The dog pushed his nose against her coat, then searched her face as if counting every breath. Holt turned back toward the pit. Mara was already photographing the ground. She measured the wire placement, marked the anchor point, and crouched beside the dead fox without disturbing it. Her expression changed when she saw the locking device. "This isn't old," she said. "I noticed." "The pit is, the setup isn't." Fresh leaves had been arranged across the depression. The wires shone where rain had washed away the mud. On the locking piece, a rectangular patch of metal bore new grinding marks. Mara took a small evidence bag from her pack. "Registration stamp should be here." "Removed?" "Looks that way." Idella raised her head. "People used to trap in these woods," she said. "Arthur found rusted chains when we first bought the place." "This cable hasn't been out here for years," Mara replied. "Possibly not even weeks." The distinction settled over them with more weight than the fog. A forgotten trap belonged to the land's past. A new one belonged to someone nearby. Mara collected the severed section from Sentry's leg and tagged it. She marked the pit's location on her handheld unit, then called for the fox to be recovered properly. "Right now," she said, "the dog needs a clinic." Idella stood too quickly. The color drained from her face. Holt reached her before she fell, but her knees had already buckled. She remained conscious, furious at the betrayal of her own body. "I am fine," she said from inside Holt's arms. Mara looked at Holt. "Does she always lie this badly? We've only known each other an hour." Then she's making a strong first impression. They carried Sentry back on the stretcher, taking turns at the handles. Idella walked between them with the maple cane and refused every offer to ride ahead. By the time they reached the truck, the fog had begun to lift. Alder Hollow's veterinary clinic occupied a converted feed store near the southern edge of town. The hand-painted sign outside read, "Pierce Animal Care," though one corner had faded enough that it appeared to offer Animal AR. Nathan Pierce met them at the side entrance. He was a compact man in his early 60s, with a high, bald forehead, a thick white mustache, and a magnifying lens pushed up like a second pair of spectacles. His steel blue scrubs were partly hidden by an ivory coat, with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked once at the stretcher and abandoned whatever greeting he had prepared. "Treatment room, now." Nathan called Sentry Officer while cutting away the mud-caked fur. "Officer Sentry, I require your cooperation." Sentry stared at him. "That expression is not cooperation." Holt remained near the dog's head. Idella stood on the other side of the table, one hand resting against Sentry's neck. The German Shepherd tolerated Nathan's examination only when both of them stayed close. X-rays showed no fracture. The wire had caused deep bruising, ligament strain, and impaired circulation, but the paw was still viable. Sentry would need wound care, a soft brace, restricted movement, and repeated checks. "He will walk," Nathan said, "but he will not enjoy the next several weeks." Idella closed her eyes. Relief did not soften her face. It nearly broke it. Nathan saw that too. He removed his gloves. "Sit down, Idella." "I am already standing." That was an instruction, not a weather report. She opened her mouth to argue, then reached for the table. Holt caught her elbow as she sagged. This time she lost consciousness. Only briefly. But when Idella woke in a chair in the waiting room, Nathan was kneeling in front of her, 2 fingers against her wrist. His humor had vanished. Her ankles were swollen above her shoes. Her breathing remained shallow even at rest, and her heartbeat skipped beneath his fingertips. "You're going to the hospital," Nathan said. "No?" "Yes." "Sentry." "We'll stay here." "No?" Nathan's mustache lifted with a controlled breath. "Idella, this is not about age. It is not about making a fuss. Your heart is telling us something, and I am not going to pretend I cannot hear it because you dislike the message." She looked toward the treatment room door. Holt understood before she asked. "I'll stay with him." Idella studied him for a long moment. "You have somewhere else to be." The therapy appointment had passed more than 2 hours earlier. "Not anymore." Her gaze dropped to the mud on his clothes, the brace beneath his jacket, and the stiffness in his left leg. Perhaps she understood that his answer contained more than scheduling. "You won't let them move him without telling me?" "No." "You won't leave him alone?" "No." Idella nodded once. Only then did she agree to go. Louise Gable, an old friend whose name Nathan found in Idella's emergency file, met the ambulance at the hospital. That allowed Holt to keep his promise. He sat on the clinic floor beside Sentry's recovery pen while the dog woke from sedation. At first, Sentry whined and searched the room with unfocused eyes. Holt offered his hand through the bars. The dog did not take it, but he stopped whining. By late afternoon, Idella had been discharged with strict instructions to arrange further cardiac testing. She dismissed the instructions as though they were unsolicited advertisements, yet she kept every page Nathan handed her. Holt drove her and Sentry home. The forest looked different now that the fog had cleared. Nothing had changed, but visibility had made the landscape less innocent. Near the rear boundary of Idella's property, Holt slowed. Fresh tire tracks crossed the muddy verge and continued onto the abandoned logging road. The tread was wide and deep, made by something heavier than a passenger vehicle. "When was the last time anyone used that road?" he asked. Idella turned in her seat. "No one is supposed to." That wasn't the question. Years. Arthur had the entrance blocked after a washout. Holt looked through the trees. The old barrier had been pulled aside. One broken post lay hidden beneath brush. At the house, he carried Sentry inside on the soft stretcher. Nathan had ordered strict rest, so Holt arranged blankets near the kitchen stove and set water within reach. When Holt stood to leave, Sentry lifted his head. "You stay," Idella told the dog. Holt reached the door. Behind him came the scrape of claws. Sentry had forced himself upright. The injured leg trembled inside its charcoal brace. He took one painful step toward Holt, then stopped and looked back at Idella. One step toward the man. One look toward the woman. His loyalty seemed stretched between two doors. Holt returned and lowered himself beside him. "I'm not taking her anywhere," he said. Sentry placed one paw on the toe of Holt's boot. Idella looked away first. Holt waited until the dog lay down again. Then he rose, promising himself that he would return in the morning only to check the generator and drive Sentry to his follow-up appointment. Nothing more. That night, after the house had gone quiet, Idella woke to a low engine moving beyond the trees. Sentry heard it too. His head rose from the blankets, ears fixed toward the abandoned road. Idella did not turn on the porch light. She crossed to the kitchen table, opened an old postal ledger, and wrote beneath the date in small, exact letters, 11:43 p.m. Heavy engine. West to northeast, road behind Lower Maple Stand. She listened until the sound disappeared. Then she drew one straight line beneath the entry and closed the book. Holt returned the next morning with a fuel filter, 2 quarts of oil, and the firm intention of staying no longer than 40 minutes. He remained until after lunch. The generator behind Idella's house had been coughing black smoke each time it started, and its metal housing rattled with the strained complaint of an appliance that had survived several owners and resented them all. Holt removed the side panel, found a cracked fuel line, and discovered that someone had repaired it years ago with electrical tape and unreasonable optimism. Idella stood in the doorway, wearing a moss-green cardigan and an expression of personal offense. Arthur said that repair would last. Arthur was wrong. He would have disliked you. Most sensible people do. From his blanket near the kitchen stove, Sentry lifted his head. The German shepherd's injured leg rested inside a charcoal brace. Nathan Pierce had ordered strict rest, which Sentry interpreted as an insult imposed by lesser minds. Each time Holt crossed the room, the dog's amber eyes followed him with the grave attention of a prisoner memorizing a guard schedule. Holt replaced the fuel line and wrote the cost of the part on a scrap of paper. Idella took it, added the price of 2 eggs, toast, and coffee beneath his total, then subtracted the meal from what she owed him. "I am not accepting breakfast as payment." "You already ate it." "That does not make it currency." "It does in this house." By the end of the first week, Holt had learned that argument was Idella's preferred form of hospitality. He took Sentry to Nathan's clinic twice. The first trip required the soft stretcher because the dog refused to put weight on the injured leg. By the second, Sentry could manage a few careful steps on a short canvas leash. Nathan removed the first bandage, inspected the swelling, and informed them that recovery was progressing well. "Officer Sentry," he said, adjusting the magnifying lens on his forehead, "you are healing despite your commitment to making everyone miserable." Sentry looked at the veterinarian with solemn contempt. Holt waited beside the examination table, while Idella sat in a chair near the wall. She had brought every page the hospital had given her, folded inside her handbag. She had not mentioned making the recommended cardiology appointment. Holt noticed. He did not ask yet. At Idella's house, the list of repairs grew quietly. The porch roof leaked above the eastern post. 2 boards had softened near the steps. The gravel lane had developed holes deep enough to drown a boot. The rear gutter sagged beneath wet leaves. Holt fixed only what needed fixing immediately. Then he noticed the next thing. And the next. Idella made him keep an account in a small notebook she placed beside the sugar bowl. He recorded screws, sealant, fuel, roofing nails, and gravel. She countered with soup, sandwiches, pie, and an hourly rate for what she called uninvited criticism. Holt accused her of manipulating the books. Idella said she had spent 40 years in the Postal Service and knew exactly how to move troublesome packages. The arrangement suited them because it allowed neither to call the other charitable. Sentry became the keeper of the schedule. At 10 each morning, he moved from the stove to the front window. At 10:15, the old Ford usually appeared between the maples. By the second week, the dog no longer watched Holt enter with suspicion. He watched to see what Holt had brought. Tools interested him. Food interested him more. One afternoon, Holt removed his brown leather gloves and set them on the porch rail before carrying a bag of patching gravel to the lane. When he returned, one glove was missing. Sentry lay in the kitchen with it between his paws. "You planning to eat that?" The dog looked away. Strong defense. Idella glanced over the top of her glasses. He takes things from people he expects to return. Holt reached for the glove. Sentry placed one paw over it. Idella hid a smile inside her teacup. Holt eventually retrieved the glove by exchanging it for half a dog biscuit, though he suspected Sentry considered the transaction a moral victory. The first hard frost silvered the roof in early November. That morning, Holt found Idella attempting to carry split wood from the shed with both arms full. She had tucked her cardiac medication into the pocket of her cardigan, but had not taken it. He removed the logs from her arms. "I was carrying those." "You were dropping them slowly." "I had not dropped a single one." "You were negotiating with gravity." She followed him into the house, offended by the existence of assistants. Holt placed the wood beside the stove and saw the unopened pill organizer on the table. "You missed the morning dose." "I was busy." "With what?" "Being inspected, apparently." "You fainted 2 weeks ago." "And recovered." "That is not how hearts work." Idella's face tightened. "You have no authority in this house, Holt Calloway." He stared at her. She had begun using his full name when angry, as though preparing a certified letter. "No," he said, "but I have eyes. And I have lived in this body for 79 years. You treat it like a rented truck." The words landed harder than he intended. Idella's hand closed over the edge of the table. Sentry rose from his blanket and positioned himself between them. He looked at Holt, then Idella, then released a long breath through his nose. The sound carried such exhausted judgment that both humans fell silent. Idella sat first. Holt turned away and fed another log into the stove. After a moment, she took the pills. Neither apologized. That became their way. 3 days later, Holt was crouched behind the generator, tightening a mounting bolt, when pain struck without warning. It did not begin as an ache. It arrived whole. His lower back locked, and a current ran down his left leg. The wrench slipped from his hand. He managed to sit rather than fall, but the movement left him on the damp ground with one shoulder against the generator housing. He waited for sensation to return. The back door opened. Holt straightened his face before Idella could see it. Sentry reached him first. The dog was still under orders not to move quickly, yet he crossed the yard with deliberate, uneven steps. Holt raised one hand. "Go back." Sentry ignored him. The German shepherd stopped close enough that the dark mane around his neck brushed Holt's sleeve. Then he leaned his shoulder against Holt's knee. Not heavily, just enough. Holt looked toward the porch. Idella stood beneath the eave, one hand gripping the post. She did not rush to him. She did not ask whether he was all right. That restraint was somehow worse. "How long does it last?" she asked. "Sometimes a minute." "And sometimes?" Holt said nothing. Sentry remained pressed against him until the pins and needles in his foot softened. When Holt could stand, he used the generator frame for support. Idella watched the movement with the quiet attention of someone filing away evidence. Inside, she poured coffee and placed the clinic reminder card beside his cup. Holt stared at it. She had taken it from the truck. "You searched my cab?" The door was open. "That does not answer the question." "You missed this appointment." "I was rescuing your dog." "You missed the one before that, too." Holt looked up. Idella's face held no accusation now, only recognition. "You think pain becomes less important if no one sees it," she said. "You think illness becomes less real if no one names it." For several seconds, neither moved. Then Idella pushed the telephone toward him. The landline had been repaired that morning. "Call," she said. "You first." She frowned. "The cardiologist," Holt added. Idella glanced at Sentry. The dog had settled beneath the table, his injured leg stretched carefully to one side. Holt's glove rested beneath his chin. "Fine," she said, "but if they put me on hold, you are still calling yours." They made the appointments back to back. The victory was so small that neither mentioned it again. The weeks reshaped the house by degrees. Holt repaired the porch roof. Idella began leaving the kitchen door unlocked at the hour he usually arrived. Sentry graduated from the brace to short supervised walks around the yard. He hated the leash, especially when falling leaves skittered across the grass just beyond reach. At meals, Idella spoke more than Holt. She told him about Arthur, who had driven a snowplow for Alder Hollow and believed every storm could be defeated by coffee strong enough to remove paint. He sang hymns badly, sharpened kitchen knives beautifully, and burned Sunday pancakes with such consistency that the smoke alarm had become part of breakfast. After Arthur died, Idella said, the house had become too large. She stopped cooking proper meals. She left mail unopened. Some mornings she did not draw the curtains. Sentry had refused to allow it. The dog brought his leash to her bed every morning and dropped it on her chest. If she ignored him, he placed both front paws beside her and stared until guilt succeeded where hope had failed. "He did not save me dramatically," Idella said. "He simply made giving up inconvenient." Holt looked at Sentry, who was attempting to persuade a piece of potato to fall from the table through concentration alone. "That sounds like him." Idella turned the question toward Holt carefully. "Was there someone who waited for you?" He could have pretended not to understand. Instead, he watched the porch lamp glowing through the window. "There was a woman," he said. "For a while." "What happened?" "I came home." "That usually helps." "Not the way I did it." He said no more at first. Idella did not push. Later, while drying the plates, Holt added that the woman had tried to understand what he would not explain. He had answered concern with silence and silence with anger when concern persisted. Eventually, she stopped waiting for him to become reachable. "I thought leaving would hurt her less," he said. "Did it?" "No." Idella handed him another plate. Men are often disappointed to learn that absence is not a form of kindness. Before Holt could answer, wind struck the side of the house. Snow began after dark. It came earlier than forecast, thick and wet, covering the lane before Holt finished securing the loose tarp over the firewood. By 9, the road had disappeared beneath several inches, and the temperature had fallen sharply. Idella stood at the window. "You cannot drive home in that?" "I have 4-wheel drive." "You also have a spine held together by pride and bad decisions." The guest room had become storage after Arthur died, so Holt slept on the living room sofa. Sentry lay near the stove, one eye opening each time Holt shifted. The house sounded different at night. Wood contracted in the walls. Pipes clicked. Wind moved through the chimney. The porch lamp cast a square of amber light across the snow, illuminating nothing except the fact that it had been left on. Holt found Idella awake at the kitchen table near midnight. Several old postal ledgers lay open before her. "These are not household accounts," he said. "No." Each page contained dates and times in Idella's precise handwriting. May 18th, 1:12 a.m. diesel engine, Lower Road. June 3rd, metallic dragging near west boundary. Sentry restless until dawn. July 26th, sweet rotten smell after rain. Not dead deer. September 14th, truck stopped near Arthur's old mailbox. 7 minutes. Holt turned another page. The entries stretched across 6 months. "You wrote down all of this?" "I wrote down what I heard." "Who did you tell?" "The sheriff's receptionist, a neighbor, Wade Mercer once, when I saw him at the feed store." "And?" "They said logging sounds travel strangely through the hills. They reminded me that age affects sleep." Idella's voice remained level, but Holt heard the wound beneath it. Not that they had disagreed, that they had decided her years made her unreliable before they had bothered to listen. Sentry lifted his head from the stove. The old road lay beyond the dark windows. Holt closed the ledger carefully. In the morning, the snow softened to flurries. A green pickup came up the lane shortly after 9, tires crunching over the fresh surface. A company logo marked the door, a fox track inside a circle. The man who stepped out was broad through the chest and neck, with sandy hair brushed neatly to one side and a trimmed yellow-gray mustache. He carried a cardboard box of canned soup, bread, and coffee as though arriving for a charity photograph. "Idella," he called warmly, "thought you might need supplies." Idella opened the door but did not step aside immediately. "Wade Mercer," she said to Holt. "He runs wildlife control for half the farms in the county." Wade smiled and offered Holt a hand. The grip was practiced, firm without challenge. "Heard you found the Hartwell dog," Wade said. "Good thing you came along." Sentry stood beside Idella. He did not bark. He did not growl. The dog became utterly still. Wade looked down. "Easy, boy." Sentry lowered his head and drew a long breath through his nose. His eyes fixed on Wade's boots, tall rubber work boots, cleaned of visible mud, but carrying a faint odor beneath the pine oil. Then Sentry stepped backward until his shoulder touched Idella's leg. Wade gave a mild laugh. "Probably smells half the forest on me. Occupational hazard." Peace die. He offered to inspect the property and set legal deterrents before winter. Idella thanked him, but said she would consider it. While Wade spoke, Holt walked around the pickup. A thin strand of steel wire had caught beneath the rear bumper, twisted around a bracket. Most people would have mistaken it for debris. Holt bent closer. The diameter looked familiar. So did the clean silver surface where the wire had recently been cut. When he straightened, Wade was watching him. The friendly smile remained, but only on his mouth. Holt did not tell Mara that Wade Mercer was guilty. He told her about the wire beneath the pickup. He described Sentry's reaction to the man's boots, the cleaned rubber carrying an odor the dog had recognized before any human in the room. He showed her the entries in Idella's ledgers and the fresh tire tracks crossing the abandoned road. Mara listened without interrupting. They stood inside the equipment room at the Alder Hollow Ranger Station, where damp jackets hung beside topographic maps, and a space heater clicked without warming much of anything. Her rust-colored field notebook lay open between them. When Holt finished, Mara capped her pen. "Wade uses wire legally," she said. "So do half the wildlife control contractors in this county." "I know." "He handles injured animals, carcasses, bait, disinfectant, and traps. Sentry reacting to his boots may mean exactly what Wade said it means." "I know that, too." And a strand beneath a bumper is not evidence that the vehicle was near Idela's property. Holt leaned against the metal table, taking weight off his left leg. You're working hard to convince me. I'm making sure you understand the difference between suspicion and proof. I understand the difference. Mara studied him. Former operators often think observation becomes evidence because they are good at observing. Rangers often think a lecture improves when it gets longer. That almost earned a smile. Instead, Mara slid an evidence photograph across the table. It showed the locking piece recovered from the quarry pit. The flat section, where a registration mark should have been, was scarred with fresh grinding lines. I sent the cable and lock to Sergeant Daniel Voss, she said. He handles complex trapping violations for fish and wildlife. Complex? Meaning cases that require more than finding someone standing beside an illegal trap. The station door opened before Holt could answer. Daniel Voss entered, carrying a black leather document case beneath one arm. He was shorter than Holt, compact rather than imposing, with a straight-backed posture that made the room seem untidy around him. His dark hair, silvering at the temples, was cut into a precise side part. He wore no beard, no visible weariness, and no expression suggesting he cared whether strangers found him agreeable. Mara made the introductions. Daniel removed a pair of reading glasses and placed 3 printed invoices on the table. The cable came from a commercial lot distributed throughout northern Vermont and parts of New Hampshire, he said. Mercer Wildlife Solutions purchased 2 rolls. Holt glanced at Mara. Daniel continued before either of them could react. So did 4 farms, 2 licensed trappers, a livestock association, and a fencing contractor. That narrows it down to everyone, Holt said. It narrows it down to no one. Oh. Daniel's voice was not dismissive. It was exact. The missing registration mark is more useful, he added. Someone removed it deliberately. But unless we recover other devices altered in the same manner, we cannot connect it to an owner. Mara opened Idela's ledger. Daniel read several entries in silence. He did not ask whether Idela's age affected her memory. He asked whether the clock in her kitchen was accurate, whether the old road could be heard from the bedroom, and whether any entries had been added after Sentry was injured. Her handwriting is consistent, Holt said. That was not my question. No, the books were already filled. Daniel nodded and returned the ledger. We verify everything. The words should have felt cold. Instead, Holt respected them. Over the following week, Mara treated Idela's notes not as testimony to be believed or dismissed, but as data waiting for companions. She obtained archived weather reports. The engine noises clustered on nights with heavy rain, high winds, or low cloud cover. The pattern was too regular to be coincidence and too careful to suggest ordinary logging. Daniel requested records of authorized trapping activity in the area. None permitted operations near the Hartwell property. Then Calvin Rusk entered the picture. His name appeared in a county file involving traps set too close to a public trail 2 years earlier. He owned a dark pickup matching Idela's incomplete description, lived east of her property, and had argued with her over Sentry chasing deer away from a hunting stand. Holt met Calvin at a rough cabin near the edge of state land. The hunter answered the door wearing a brown moss jacket and a burnt-orange knit cap pulled over collar-length blonde-brown hair. A narrow goatee sharpened an already angular face. His left cheek carried a shallow dent, as though an old injury had pushed the skin inward and forgotten to release it. Calvin looked at Holt's combat shirt, then at the official vehicle parked behind Mara. You bring a ranger to admire my porch? Mara held up her identification. We're asking about trapping equipment. You can ask from there. His dislike of authority was so immediate it felt less like hostility than a household custom. Calvin admitted owning cable restraints. He also admitted arguing with Idela. Her dog ran through my lower stand twice, he said. Didn't hurt anything, just made sure every deer in Vermont knew I was there." "You threatened Sentry?" Holt asked. "I told Adela to leash him." That was not the question. Calvin's eyes hardened. "No, I didn't threaten the dog." Mara asked to inspect his registered equipment. Calvin refused until Daniel arrived with the necessary authorization. The traps in Calvin's shed were dirty, numbered, and maintained with more care than his house. None matched the lock from the pit. Yet in a box beneath his workbench, Mara found several empty spaces shaped by years of stored metal. Calvin stared at them for a long moment. Then he swore. He had sold 6 obsolete restraints to Wade Mercer the previous spring. "They were legal when I bought them," Calvin said. "Old hardware, no current tags. Wade said he wanted the springs and swivels for repairs." "Did he mention the Hartwell Road?" Mara asked. Calvin looked toward the window. "He asked whether the old logging bed still crossed her lower acreage." "When?" "Summer." "Why?" "Said he had a farmer losing calves near the eastern ridge and needed another access route." "There is no farm on the eastern ridge," Holt said. "I know that now." Calvin removed his orange cap and rubbed a hand through his hair. "In mud season, every other trail out there swallows a truck to the axles. The Hartwell Road sits on old quarry stone. You could move weight over it in weather that would close the rest." That fact changed the map. At the ranger station, Mara spread county surveys across a long table. The abandoned road did not appear on newer public maps, but an older timber map showed it continuing past Adela's boundary, cutting through state land, and reconnecting with a northern service route. Someone could enter near the Hartwell property and emerge miles away without passing through Alder Hollow. Adela's house was not merely near the road, it overlooked its most vulnerable entrance. Mara sat back. "Wade asked to buy access before?" "Not directly," Holt said. "He offered to inspect her land." "That may have been innocent." "Do you believe that?" "I believe it has to survive someone else asking the same question." Daniel approved a limited camera placement on state land along the northern service route. No one entered private property. No one followed Wade. The investigation advanced through permissions, requests, and hours of watching nothing happen. A gas station manager eventually provided old security footage after Mara matched dates from Adela's ledger. On 3 stormy nights, a box trailer without company markings passed northbound after midnight. Mud obscured part of the plate, but 2 visible numbers matched those Adela had written in July. Daniel watched the video twice. "It supports the ledger," he said. "Is that enough?" Holt asked. "It is more than we had yesterday." The next name came from delivery receipts. Eli Boone drove supplies for feed stores, farms, and small contractors throughout the county. Holt found him unloading salt blocks behind a warehouse in Alder Hollow. Eli was a narrow-shouldered man of 42 whose faded navy work jacket seemed built for someone heavier. A maroon trucker cap had flattened his reddish-brown hair. Blue ink stained his thumb, and a braided bracelet, bright threads against weathered skin, circled one wrist. When Mara mentioned Mercer's warehouse, Eli began checking his phone before any notification appeared. He had delivered industrial salt and disinfectant there several times. Once after midnight, Wade asked him to unload beside a refrigerated truck. "I heard scratching," Eli said. "From inside?" Mara asked. He nodded. "And what did Wade tell you?" "Injured wildlife. Said he was moving animals to rehabilitation." "Did you see them?" "No." "Did you smell anything?" Eli's mouth tightened. "Wet fur, waste, something sweet underneath, like meat left too long." "Why didn't you report it?" "My wife was in treatment. Still is." He touched the braided bracelet. "Mercer's contract paid our insurance gap for 3 months." No one accused him. That made him look more ashamed. "I wanted his explanation to be true," he said. Holt understood that sentence better than he wanted to. People rarely chose lies because they were convincing. They chose them because the truth demanded payment. Eli would not yet give a formal statement. He needed time, though time was precisely what the trapped animals, if there were animals, might not have. That evening, Holt returned to Idella's house carrying more questions than answers. He found her seated at the kitchen table with a hospital envelope before her. Sentry rested nearby, his brace removed but his movements still careful. Idella had finally attended the cardiology appointment. She had not told Holt the result. He read enough from her face. How bad? The doctor used several long words. Idella. Progressive heart failure. The room seemed to lose its edges. How long have you known? I knew something was wrong. How long? Months. Holt turned away, then back again. You stood on that road. You walked into the woods. You kept carrying wood. Sentry was missing. That does not make your heart optional. Her expression sharpened. Do not raise your voice in my kitchen. You could have collapsed out there. And you could lose the use of your leg every time you crawl beneath a machine, yet you call that weather. That is different. No, it is male. The anger in Holt rose because she was right and because rightness did nothing to reduce his fear. You should have told someone. So they could do what? Watch me? Move me? Decide I am no longer qualified to live in my own house? So you would not be alone. Idella stood too quickly, one hand finding the table. I was not afraid of being alone, she said. I was afraid of becoming someone's burden. Holt went still. She looked directly at him. A man who has locked his entire life behind one door has no right to condemn another person for fearing the weight of their own need. The sentence found every place armor had failed. Holt walked out. Cold rain had begun, needling through the bare branches. He crossed the yard toward his truck, his back rigid and his hands unsteady with anger. Behind him came the scrape of claws on the porch. Sentry descended one step at a time. Go back, Holt said. The dog continued. His heeled leg still favored the ground, but he crossed the wet yard until he stood between Holt and the house. Idella appeared in the doorway. Sentry, come. The German shepherd looked at her, then at Holt. He did not move toward either. Rain darkened the golden fur along his back. His ears lowered, not in fear, but in distress. He seemed less like an animal refusing a command than a creature trying to hold two pieces of a world together. Holt opened the truck door. Sentry placed one paw on his boot. It was the same quiet gesture he had used after the rescue. Not restraint. A request. Holt looked past the dog to Idella. She seemed very small in the lighted doorway. He closed the truck. Inside, neither of them apologized immediately. Holt hung his wet jacket by the stove. Idella sat. Sentry lowered himself between their chairs with a weary sigh. I am still angry, Holt said. So am I. I'm not leaving. That was not permission. No. After a moment, Idella reached for the hospital envelope and pushed it toward him. It was not surrender. It was trust in its most uncomfortable form. Near midnight, Mara called. The camera on state land had finally recorded movement. Holt drove to the ranger station, where Daniel had paused the footage on a grainy frame. Two men were unloading long shapes from an unmarked trailer. The objects were hidden beneath dark tarps, but squared metal outlines showed beneath the fabric. Cages. Mara advanced the video. One man dragged a covered cage toward the trees. The second stopped suddenly and looked toward the camera. For 1 second, his face filled the frame in pale infrared. Then he reached up. The image tilted violently toward the ground. Leaves and boots blurred together. The feed went black. Fear did not make Wade Mercer careless. It made him helpful. 3 mornings after the camera feed went dark, he used his truck to pull a dairy farmer's tractor from a frozen ditch. That afternoon, he delivered 2 bags of feed to a widow whose son was working out of state. By evening, half of Alder Hollow had heard that the state ranger intended to restrict predator control before calving season. Wade never called Mara Bell dishonest. He said she was young. He never said Holt Calloway was dangerous. He wondered aloud whether an injured veteran living alone might sometimes mistake vigilance for certainty. He did not accuse Idella Hartwell of confusion. He expressed concern that other people were placing too much pressure on a sick elderly woman. Each sentence was shaped like kindness. Together, they formed a cage. Holt heard the rumors at the hardware store. The owner, who had known Wade for 20 years, asked whether Mara truly planned to outlaw cable restraints. A man buying furnace filters said coyotes would take every lamb in the valley, while people with clipboards debated humane alternatives. When Holt answered that no one was closing lawful wildlife control services, the man looked at his combat shirt, his scar, and the stiffness in his left leg. "You sure you're not a little close to this?" Holt set the box of roofing screws on the counter. "Close enough to know what a wire does when it tightens." He left before anger could turn explanation into proof of Wade's story. At Idella's house, the porch lamp burned against a gray afternoon. Sentry was walking without his brace now, though Nathan had limited him to short, controlled exercise. The German shepherd followed Holt from the kitchen to the window, favoring the injured leg only after standing too long. Idella sat at the table sorting medication into a weekly organizer. She looked up when Holt entered. "You have the face." "What face?" "The one that suggests someone in town has mistaken confidence for intelligence." Before Holt could answer, an engine climbed the lane. Wade's green pickup stopped near the porch. He emerged without food this time. His waxed canvas coat was buttoned neatly, and his silver deerhead belt buckle showed beneath it whenever he moved. In one gloved hand, he carried a leather document folder. Sentry rose. The dog did not bark. His body went still beside Idella's chair. Wade removed his cap before entering. "Thought we should talk before this gets more unpleasant than necessary." "It became unpleasant when my dog came home bleeding," Idella said. Wade's smile thinned but remained. He placed the folder on the table. Inside was a purchase offer for the southern portion of Idella's property, including access to the old logging road. The price was higher than the land would ordinarily bring. Wade spoke gently. "Winter's hard out here, Idella. That lane gets worse every year. You've got medical appointments in town. Sell the lower acreage, keep the house, and use the money to make things easier." "For whom?" "For everyone." Holt stood near the stove, saying nothing. Wade glanced at him. "Your friend's been doing a lot of work around here. Generous, considering his own condition?" Holt felt the reference before Wade finished. "Back injuries are unpredictable," Wade continued. "One bad step on an icy road can change a man's life." The room became very quiet. The words were mild enough to repeat in public. Their meaning depended entirely on who heard them. Idella closed the folder. "No. You haven't considered the figure." "I considered the road." Wade's eyes shifted. Idella tapped the papers once. "Arthur closed that road because the quarry edge was unstable. No commercial traffic, no outside access. That condition remains. I'm offering to improve it. You are offering to own the part you need." For the first time, Wade's expression failed to recover immediately. Sentry moved one step closer to Idella. Wade looked down at the dog, then back at Holt. "You should be careful what you encourage her to believe." Holt answered softly. "You should be careful what you assume she does not understand." Wade put on his cap. At the door, he paused. "People around here know what I've done for them." Idella rested both hands on the folder. "Then perhaps you should have been satisfied with doing it." After he left, she carried the offer to the wood stove. Holt stopped her before she could burn it. "Daniel may want that." Idella surrendered the papers reluctantly. I was hoping to improve the coffee. By the end of the week, rumor had grown louder than evidence. Farmers called the ranger station demanding assurances. A petition circulated against outside interference, though Mara had been living in Alder Hollow for nearly a year. Someone left a dead coyote beside the station entrance with a handwritten sign asking whether she planned to adopt it. Daniel Voss advised her not to respond publicly until he had secured more evidence. Mara disagreed. Silence leaves Wade as the only person explaining the investigation. An active investigation is not a public debate. No, but public trust determines whether witnesses speak. Daniel removed his reading glasses. That is why we present what can be verified, not what we suspect. A compromise became a town meeting. The gathering took place in Alder Hollow's old municipal hall, a brick building that had once housed the fire station. Folding chairs filled the room. Wet coats steamed near the radiators. Farmers sat beside shopkeepers, volunteer firefighters, church members, and people who had come simply because conflict was the only winter entertainment the town offered for free. Holt arrived early. Idella arrived late on purpose. Louise Gable pushed her through the doors in a borrowed wheelchair. Louise was a full-figured woman of 72 with steel-silver hair curved neatly around her jaw and red-framed glasses that made every look feel editorial. A burgundy leather bag hung from one arm, large enough to contain medicine, legal documents, and possibly a smaller emergency government. "I told her not to come," Holt said. Louise parked the wheelchair beside him. "And I told her you would say that." Idella wore a deep teal coat and a wine-colored scarf. A portable oxygen cylinder rested behind the chair, its narrow tube looped beneath her nose. Sentry walked beside her on the olive canvas leash and settled at her feet. Holt crouched beside the wheelchair. "You should be home." "I spent 40 years delivering other people's words," Idella replied. "I will survive 10 minutes delivering my own." At the front of the hall, Mara presented only what Daniel had cleared. She explained that an illegal trap had been found near the Hartwell property. She showed photographs of the altered lock and the covered cages recorded on state land. She displayed weather records beside the dates in Idella's ledgers. She did not name Wade as a suspect. Wade sat in the second row, surrounded by men whose farms he had serviced for years. His face remained composed. A sheep farmer stood. "You shut down people like Mercer. What are we supposed to do when coyotes come through?" "No lawful service has been shut down," Mara replied. "Yet." Another man asked why the town should trust notes written by someone who sometimes needed oxygen to cross a room. The words produced an uncomfortable rustle. Holt began to stand. Idella touched his wrist. She rose only halfway from the wheelchair, then thought better of it and remained seated. Louise placed the old blue postal ledger in her lap. Idella did not read every entry. She looked across the hall instead. "When I worked the Alder Hollow route," she said, "I carried tax checks, birthday cards, divorce papers, military notices, college acceptances, and letters people waited years to receive." The room quieted. A wrong number did not mean a small mistake. One wrong number could send the most important day of someone's life to the wrong house. She opened the ledger. "I wrote down what I heard because writing things down was my profession. Dates, times, directions, partial plates when I could see them." Her hand trembled, but her voice did not. "You may decide I am old. That is obvious and requires no investigation. But if you decide I am unreliable, then compare my notes to the weather reports and the station camera. Do not dismiss them, because my hands now shake more than yours." She closed the book. "I am not asking you to believe me instead of the evidence. I am asking you to stop pretending I am not part of it." No one applauded. The silence was better. It meant people were thinking. Wade rose slowly. "Idella, No one doubts your service to this town." Louise muttered, "That sentence already has mud on its boots." Wade continued, "But fear can connect things that have nothing to do with one another." Sentry raised his head. Idella looked at Wade. "So can profit." That time, a few people reacted, not loudly, a shifting of posture, a glance withheld. One of the farmers beside Wade moved his chair several inches away without appearing to notice. The meeting did not end with the town united. Some remained loyal to Wade, others left uncertain. A few approached Mara privately and mentioned unusual trucks, missing traps, or animals they had assumed were taken by predators. Doubt had entered the room. Wade could no longer control which direction it faced. Outside, snowmelt dripped from the roof. Holt helped Louise settle Idella into her car while Sentry waited beside the open door. "You spoke too long," Holt said. "I spoke for 4 minutes." 3 too many. "You sound like a man who has never attended a postal union meeting." Louise pointed at Holt. "She is tired. You are irritating. Both conditions are chronic." Then she drove Idella home. Holt found Eli Boone after dark behind the delivery depot. Eli was seated in his truck, staring at his phone. The braided bracelet from his daughter showed beneath his sleeve. "I heard about the meeting," he said. "Then you heard Wade still has defenders." "He will always have defenders." "Maybe." Holt remained outside the open driver's door. He did not ask Eli again for a statement. Instead, he told him about Afghanistan. Not the mission details, not names. He spoke of a transport route that had shown signs of compromise. Small inconsistencies, changed timing, an interpreter's warning Holt could not confirm. Reporting it formally would have delayed an operation and embarrassed an officer who had already dismissed the concern. Holt had waited. The next patrol encountered an explosive device. No one died, but a teammate suffered injuries that became worse because the route had not been altered. "I told myself I needed certainty," Holt said. "The truth was that certainty would have protected me from being wrong." Eli looked at him. "Did your friend forgive you?" "He said there was nothing to forgive." "Did you believe him?" "No." The heater inside Eli's truck clicked softly. "My wife needs the insurance," Eli said. "If Wade cuts the contract—" "I know." "No, you don't." "You're right." Holt did not offer courage as though it were cheap. Eli reached beneath the passenger seat and removed a manila envelope. Inside were delivery receipts, printed messages requesting after-hours drop-offs, and a photograph taken months earlier when Eli had documented damage to a pallet. In the background stood Wade's unmarked box trailer. Enough of the plate was visible to compare with the gas station footage. "I can give you these," Eli said, "but not a statement. Not yet." Holt accepted the envelope. "Then this is what you can do today." Daniel added the material to the case. The cable lot, altered locks, tire impressions, partial plate, state land video, historical road, and delivery schedule now formed a pattern. It was stronger than suspicion, but still incomplete. Daniel submitted an application for a search warrant. Then they waited. By evening, freezing rain coated the streets. Holt was at Idella's house when his phone rang. Eli's name appeared on the screen. His voice came fast and low. "I'm behind Mercer's warehouse." "Why?" "I had a delivery nearby. The bay doors are open." Holt heard an engine through the call. "They're moving the cages," Eli said. "Covered ones, loading them into the trailer." "Leave. Call Daniel." "If I leave, they'll be gone." "Eli." A metal door slammed in the distance. Eli took one breath. When he spoke again, the fear remained, but indecision did not. "I'll make the statement, all of it." Another engine started. "But they're leaving tonight." Daniel Voss did not call it a raid. He called it the execution of a search warrant, as if careful language might keep fear from making decisions before the law arrived. The warrant had been approved shortly after Eli's statement was recorded. By then, freezing rain had glazed the roads, and Wade's men were already loading the last covered cages into the unmarked trailer. Inside the ranger station, a county map covered most of the central table. Daniel coordinated with Vermont State Police and 2 wildlife officers trained to handle injured animals. Mara marked the warehouse, the Northern Service Road, and the wooden bridge where the route narrowed above a steep creek bank. Holt stood at the far end of the table, leaning one hand against its edge. "You are not entering the warehouse," Daniel said. "I did not ask to." "You were considering it." "I was considering the road." Daniel glanced at him over his reading glasses. "That answer is why I am repeating myself." Eli had provided the location of a secondary loading gate and every message Wade had sent regarding after-hours deliveries. His evidence gave Daniel enough to act, but the weather and the moving vehicle complicated the plan. If the trailer reached the state highway, it could separate from the truck or disappear among commercial traffic. Holt pointed to the old quarry road. "They will not use the highway entrance." Mara looked up. "Why not?" "Too exposed. There are cameras at the fuel station, and Wade knows we have seen them. He will take the old road through Idella's lower boundary, then turn north at the timber junction." Daniel examined the map. "That route is partially washed out. For a car, not for a truck with high clearance." "And the bridge?" "Narrow enough to control." Daniel traced the route with his pen, then assigned 2 state police vehicles to the northern bridge. Holt tapped the southern junction. "This is the only place the logging road meets a maintained route before the bridge." "You stay there," Daniel said. "You observe and report. You do not pursue. You do not block a vehicle." Holt held Daniel's gaze. "I understand." Daniel's expression suggested that understanding and obedience were separate categories. Mara pulled on her forest green parka and checked the radio at her shoulder. Before she left, she paused beside Holt. "Sentry is still recovering because you knew when to stop forcing the situation." "I remember." "Apply the lesson broadly." Holt wanted to tell her that dogs were simpler than men. Instead, he said, "Get the cages open." The forest had turned black by the time Holt reached the junction. Freezing rain tapped against the windshield and hardened along the edges of the wipers. His Ford idled beneath bare maples, headlights off, facing the mouth of the logging road. The old injury in his back had been restless all evening. He had taken the medication prescribed at his last therapy appointment, but still felt a narrow band of heat running toward his left hip. He adjusted the support brace beneath his combat shirt. Then he waited. Over the radio came fragments of movement. Mara reporting from state land. Daniel confirming positions. A trooper near the bridge testing reception. No one spoke of what might be inside the cages. Holt pictured Sentry beside Idella's stove, golden black head raised each time wind moved against the house. He pictured the wire buried beneath leaves and the fox that had died before anyone heard it. The urge to move was almost physical. For most of Holt's adult life, waiting had meant failure was approaching while someone else decided whether he was permitted to prevent it. Tonight, waiting was the assignment. He kept both hands on the wheel. At 10:17, headlights appeared between the trees. Too early. The truck emerged from the old road carrying the unmarked box trailer. It moved faster than Holt expected, tires throwing slush against the brush. Holt reached for the radio. "Vehicle at South Junction, moving north." Daniel answered immediately. "Maintain position. Units are ready at the bridge." The trailer fish-tailed as the driver turned onto the maintained road. For a second, Holt saw one of the rear doors flex outward from the weight inside. Then the truck accelerated. The wooden bridge was 7 miles north. The road between them crossed 2 unmarked forks. If the driver knew the terrain, he could leave the expected route before reaching police. Holt transmitted the concern. No answer came. Static swallowed Daniel's voice. The truck was already passing him. Holt saw the driver's silhouette and another man in the passenger seat. The pickup bore no company logo, but the trailer plate matched Eli's photograph. He made a decision that was smaller than heroism and larger than permission. Holt pulled the Ford forward into the mouth of the narrow junction, angled it across half the road, set the brake, and stepped out. He left enough space for the truck to avoid a direct collision, not enough to pass at speed. The approaching driver hit the horn. Holt moved toward the ditch. The pickup braked late. Its front end swung around the Ford, but the trailer clipped the rear quarter panel with a heavy metallic blow. The impact spun Holt's truck several feet. Its open door struck Holt's shoulder and knocked him onto the frozen verge. Pain erupted through his lower back. His left leg vanished beneath him, not physically, but from sensation, as though the ground had swallowed it. The truck regained control and continued north. Holt lay on one elbow, breath trapped behind his ribs. No dramatic enemy came to finish the job. No one stepped from the vehicle. There was only the receding engine, the freezing rain, and a body that refused to follow orders. Holt reached for the radio clipped inside his jacket. "Vehicle passed South Junction," he said through clenched teeth. "Trailer struck my Ford, continuing north." Daniel's voice returned through the static. "Are you injured?" "Yes." A pause. In another life, Holt would have answered differently. "Can you move?" "Not safely." The admission cost him more than the fall. "Direction?" Daniel asked. "Still north. Driver overcorrected after the junction. Trailer is pulling right. They will slow at the bridge." Mara's voice cut in. "We have them." Holt closed his eyes. He heard distant sirens several minutes later. At the wooden bridge, 2 state police vehicles blocked the northern exit, while Mara and a wildlife officer closed from the south. The damaged trailer could not turn around on the narrow approach. The driver stopped. Neither man resisted for long. By the time Daniel reached Holt, feeling had begun to return to his foot in painful sparks. Daniel crouched beside him, rain shining on the shoulders of his duty jacket. "I told you not to block the road." "I left them room." "They hit you." "Poor driving." Daniel's jaw tightened. Then he looked toward the twisted rear panel of the Ford. "You changed their speed enough for the bridge team to close." Holt waited. "That does not make it authorized," Daniel added. "There he is." An ambulance took Holt to the county hospital, where imaging showed no new fracture or major spinal damage. The collision had aggravated the existing nerve injury and caused severe muscle spasm. He was discharged with a cane, stronger medication, and instructions that sounded suspiciously like surrender. While Holt sat beneath fluorescent lights, the search warrant was executed. The warehouse looked ordinary from the road: corrugated metal walls, 2 loading bays, a small office with Mercer Wildlife Solutions painted across the glass. Inside, the air changed. Wildlife officers found rows of unregistered cable restraints, steel jaw traps altered beyond legal limits, sedatives stored without proper records, and shipping documents listing false destinations. Behind a temporary partition stood the cages. Some were empty but stained from repeated use. Others held exhausted animals under dirty tarps. A young bobcat pressed itself into the rear corner of one cage, one foreleg swollen and its spotted coat dulled by dehydration. 2 hounds occupied separate crates nearby. Both were thin, and one wore the remains of a red nylon collar beneath the grime. When a technician passed a scanner over the dog's shoulder, the device beeped. The microchip belonged to a family in the next county. The hound had been reported missing 4 months earlier. Mara stood beside the cage as the animal was given water. The dog drank too fast, stopped to cough, then began again. That small, ordinary desperation hurt more than the files. In the rear office, Daniel found an internal ledger. The animals were recorded through codes rather than species names. Payment amounts matched scheduled deliveries. Photographs stored on a company tablet showed hides from protected animals and cages prepared for transport. The locks recovered from the warehouse had their registration surfaces ground away in the same direction and with the same tool pattern as the device found beside Sentry. Tire impressions from Wade's truck matched casts taken near the Hartwell logging road. No single item had solved the case. Together, they left little room for innocence. Wade arrived while officers were still documenting the warehouse. He wore his clean navy vest and silver deerhead buckle as if he had come to calm an administrative misunderstanding. "This is lawful wildlife control," he said. Daniel showed him the microchip record. Wade's expression barely changed. "Stray dog wandered into a holding area. For 4 months? My staff handles intake." Daniel opened the ledger to a coded entry corresponding to the date the hound disappeared. Wade looked toward the warehouse floor where one of his employees was being questioned. The trusted man of Alder Hollow did not collapse, confess, or rage. He asked for an attorney. Wade and 2 employees were arrested on charges connected to illegal trapping, unlawful possession of protected wildlife, falsified transport records, and animal cruelty. Further charges would depend on the full review of the evidence. He was not the leader of an international empire. He was something more believable and, to the people who had trusted him, perhaps more difficult to accept. A local man who had discovered that respectability could hide profitable cruelty. Near dawn, Mara drove Holt from the hospital to Idella's house. He used a wooden cane provided by the hospital, placing it carefully before each step. His Ford had been towed, and his movements carried none of the efficiency he preferred others to see. The porch light was on. Sentry appeared behind the glass before Mara had turned off the engine. The door opened, and the German Shepherd came into the yard. At first, Sentry moved quickly. Then he saw the cane. His pace changed at once. The dog approached Holt in a controlled walk, ears forward, amber eyes studying the uneven way his left foot met the ground. He circled once, then pressed his shoulder lightly against Holt's leg. Holt rested one hand on the dark fur around his neck. "You are becoming predictable." Sentry remained beside him as they crossed the yard, matching each shortened step. Idella waited under the porch lamp, wrapped in her navy coat despite the hour. Mara told her about the warehouse, the bobcat, the 2 hounds, the microchip. The cages opened one by one. Idella listened without interrupting. When Mara finished, she closed her eyes. "Are they alive?" "The ones we found are being treated." Idella nodded. She did not celebrate Wade's arrest. She did not say she had been right. She looked down at Sentry. "That is enough for tonight." Snow replaced the freezing rain shortly after sunrise. They sat on the porch beneath blankets, Idella in her chair, Holt with the cane resting beside him, Mara on the top step, and Sentry stretched across the boards between them. Large flakes descended through the maples and covered the old logging road. For a little while, no one discussed evidence, charges, or what the town would say. The animals were out of the cages. The rest could wait until daylight. Idella's breathing changed before anyone noticed her hand tighten around the blanket. She drew in one shallow breath, then another that did not seem to reach far enough. Sentry rose immediately. Holt reached her as her shoulders folded forward. "Idella." She tried to answer but could not gather the air. Mara called emergency services while Holt kept Idella upright. He did not tell her to calm down. He did not promise she would be fine. He simply stayed where she could see him. At the hospital, the cardiologist explained that Idella's heart failure had progressed to its final stage. The attack had not been caused by the investigation, the meeting, or the night's events. Her heart had been weakening for months, perhaps longer. Treatment could ease symptoms. It could not restore what had been lost. Idella listened from the hospital bed, oxygen beneath her nose. Louise sat on one side. Holt stood on the other with his cane. "What happens now?" Idella asked. The doctor described medication, oxygen, nursing visits, and hospice care. Can that happen at home? Yes, if you have support. Idella looked at Holt. He did not answer for her. That mattered. I want to go home, she said. Outside the hospital window, snow continued to fall over Alder Hollow, covering roofs, roads, and every track leading into the forest. By evening, the arrangements had begun. Idella would return to the house beneath the maples. The porch light would remain on, and this time she would not be there alone. By January, Idella's house had learned the sound of visitors. Tires pressed fresh grooves into the snow. Boots gathered beside the kitchen door. Coats occupied hooks Arthur had installed for a family of 2 and somehow never removed. Some people arrived with purpose. Louise Gable managed medication schedules, nursing appointments, and legal documents from the burgundy handbag that seemed capable of producing anything except patience. Nathan Pierce came twice a week to check Sentry's leg and, while he was there, found excuses to listen to Idella's breathing. Mara brought reports from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Calvin Rusk began helping her locate abandoned traps, then stood before a room of local hunters and explained why old habits were not an excuse for unnecessary suffering. Eli Boone lost Wade's delivery contract, but found work with a farm cooperative whose owner said a man willing to lose income for the truth was probably worth trusting with inventory. Other visitors came because they did not know what else to do. Someone repaired the worst stretch of Idella's lane without leaving a name. A new mailbox appeared beside the road, painted white with Hartwell in careful black letters. Bundles of split firewood accumulated beneath the porch roof. Not everyone apologized. A few people continued saying Wade had done good things before he went wrong, as though kindness and cruelty had to take turns living inside a person. Others avoided Idella because shame was easier to carry at a distance. Idella accepted the firewood. She did not forgive anyone on behalf of their silence. Holt moved into the living room. He claimed it was temporary, though he brought enough clothing to suggest a flexible definition. His cane leaned beside the sofa. His physical therapist had ordered rest, controlled movement, and an end to improvised vehicle interventions, a phrase Holt suspected Daniel had contributed. He handled cooking with the confidence of a man approaching an unfamiliar explosive. On his first grocery trip, Holt returned with 3 kinds of coffee, canned soup, dog biscuits, batteries, lamp oil, and no sugar. Idella inspected the bags from her chair. You crossed enemy territory for a living. So I've been told. And yet a handwritten list defeated you. The sugar was implied. Sugar has never survived by implication. Louise found a bag in her purse. Holt decided not to ask why. Those weeks were not solemn in the way people expected dying to be. There were difficult mornings when Idella could not cross the room without stopping for breath. There were nights when oxygen hissed beside her bed, and Holt lay awake on the sofa, counting the pauses between sounds. But there were also burnt biscuits. Nathan attempted to teach Holt how to cook them properly, and produced a batch hard enough to qualify as building material. Sentry stole one, carried it beneath the table, then abandoned it after a single experimental bite. Officer Sentry has standards, Nathan said. He ate roadkill once, Idella replied. Standards can develop. Sentry's injured leg had healed well. A thin scar remained above the rear paw, but he could walk without a limp, unless tired. Every morning he made a slow circuit through the yard and returned to Idella's chair as though submitting a report. Mara brought photographs of the rescued animals. The bobcat had gained weight and would remain in rehabilitation until spring. One hound had already returned to its family. In the photograph, a boy sat on the kitchen floor with both arms wrapped around the dog's narrow chest. Idella held the picture for a long time. Sentry rested his muzzle on her knee. Well, she whispered, at least somebody got home. The second hound was reunited with an elderly couple 2 towns away. They sent Idella a handwritten note thanking the woman whose records had helped open the cages. Idella placed both the note and photograph in Arthur's old postal bag. Near the end of January, Louise arrived with a local attorney. Holt found them at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers. Idella wore her oatmeal-colored sweater and reading glasses. Sentry lay beneath her chair, one paw touching the toe of her slipper. "What is this?" Holt asked. "Paperwork," Louise said. "I recognize the species." Idella slid a document toward him. It transferred legal ownership and responsibility for Sentry to Holt upon her death. Attached were veterinary records, feeding instructions, medication history, and several pages written in Idella's exact postal hand. Thunder, closet beneath the stairs, door open. Does not like vacuum cleaner. Opinion unlikely to change. Will pretend not to understand. Move if comfortable. Do not give bacon, regardless of facial argument. A modest fund had been set aside for future veterinary expenses. Holt pushed the papers back. No. The attorney looked at Louise. Louise looked at the ceiling, perhaps requesting patience from an authority more qualified than herself. Idella folded her hands. Which part? All of it. You will need to be more specific. Lawyers charge by the hour. Sentry is yours. He is himself. You know what I mean. I do. That is why I am correcting you. Holt looked down at the German Shepherd. Sentry's amber eyes moved between them. I may not be able to care for him properly. You have been caring for him for months. While you were here. My presence has not improved your cooking. This is not about cooking. No, it is about fear wearing practical clothes. Holt's jaw tightened. His back still failed without warning. Some nights he woke from memories he could not explain to a dog. He had driven away from people who loved him and called it protection. What happens if I get worse? He asked. What happens when I lose my temper? When I shut down? Idella's expression softened, which Holt found harder to withstand than argument. Then you learn to ask for help before you call leaving a kindness. He turned toward the window. Beyond the glass, the porch lamp burned despite the afternoon light. I am not asking you to replace me, Idella said. No one can do that, and it would be a terrible job opening. Louise made a sound suspiciously close to laughter. Idella continued. Sentry has never been property. He is a living creature who needs to know which door will open when he comes home. Holt did not sign that day, but he took the papers. It was the closest thing to consent he could manage. Idella's final evening arrived without ceremony. Snow had stopped before sunset. The sky cleared, and moonlight spread blue across the yard. Mara had visited after lunch. Nathan had adjusted the medication. Louise left only after Idella threatened to report her for unlawful occupation. Holt prepared tea that Idella barely drank. Sentry lay beside the bed. Idella's breathing had become soft and shallow, each inhale followed by a pause that made the room wait with her. She asked Holt to open the top drawer of the bedside table. Inside lay Sentry's old leather collar. The brass nameplate read, Sentry. On the inner surface, worn smooth by years of fur, Arthur Hartwell's name had been stamped into the leather. Holt brought it to her. Idella ran one finger across the letters. Arthur bought this when Sentry was all feet and bad judgment. Some things improve slowly. Arthur never did. Holt sat beside the bed. Idella held out the collar. He did not take it at first. After Arthur died, she explained, Sentry had refused to let the house become a tomb. Every morning he had brought her the leash. Every evening he had waited beside the kitchen table until she ate. He did not heal me, she said. People use that word too easily. Sentry lifted his head. He kept me participating. Idella looked at Holt. Now he needs someone who understands the difference. Holt accepted the collar. The brass felt warm from her hand. I don't know how to do this, he said. Neither does he. For once she did not offer a sharper answer. Sentry rose and placed his muzzle against the mattress. Idella rested her hand between his ears, her thumb touching the V-shaped notch. "You stay with him," she whispered. Holt did not know which of them she meant. Perhaps that was the point. Before dawn, Idella's breathing grew quieter. Holt sat on one side of the bed. Sentry remained on the other. The porch lamp cast a narrow amber line beneath the curtains. At some point, one breath did not lead to another. The room did not transform. The clock continued. The oxygen machine continued its low mechanical hum until Holt reached over and switched it off. Sentry stood. He pressed his nose against Idella's wrist, then against her cheek. He waited. When she did not respond, he placed his muzzle on her hand. Holt did not pull him away. He sat beside the dog while darkness thinned beyond the windows. There was nothing useful to repair, no instruction that would make grief more efficient. So they stayed. Morning entered the room slowly and found them there. The funeral was held 4 days later, beneath a sky the color of old tin. Afterward, people gathered at the house, ate food no one remembered bringing, and spoke about Idella as though arranging memories into a shape death could not disturb. When the last car left, Sentry returned to the front door. He waited there through evening. The next morning, he waited again. He ate little. He slept near Idella's bedroom and lifted his head whenever the floorboards creaked. Holt began to believe the dog would be better with someone else. Louise might know a family with land. Mara knew experienced handlers. Nathan could help choose a home. Holt told himself this was responsible. He avoided naming it as departure. While sorting Idella's papers, Louise found Arthur's postal bag beneath the hall bench. Inside were the photographs, the thank you note, and one sealed envelope addressed in Idella's hand. Holt Calloway. He opened it alone at the kitchen table. The note contained only 2 lines. Don't let him think he was left behind. And Holt, stop believing that about yourself. Sentry lay at the front door. Holt read the words again. He had spent years confusing abandonment with safety. If he left first, no one could send him away. If he refused dependence, no one could discover he was insufficient. But Sentry did not need a flawless man. He needed someone to open the door. Holt crossed the room and sat on the floor beside him. "We're going home," he said. Sentry did not rise immediately. Holt clipped Arthur's old canvas leash to the leather collar and waited. At last, Sentry stood. The cabin north of Alder Hollow smelled of cold wood, and rooms kept closed too long. For the first several evenings, Sentry sat beside the front window, watching the road as if Idella might arrive in Louise's car. Holt sat nearby without calling him away. They waited together until darkness covered the trees. Grief did not lessen because it was shared. It simply stopped being solitary. By early spring, snow withdrew from the southern slopes. Holt returned to physical therapy and stopped treating each appointment like a negotiation. He accepted Mara's invitation to assist with the trap removal program, not as an officer or rescuer, but as a volunteer who understood terrain and had finally learned to use a radio before acting alone. At the cabin, he repaired the broken porch lamp. Every evening it cast a warm circle across the steps. One afternoon, Holt's Ford came up the drive after therapy. Sentry had been asleep by the window. The engine woke him. He ran into the yard, golden black coat bright beneath the spring sun, the V-notch in his ear visible as the wind lifted it. Holt stepped from the truck slowly. His back still hurt. Some days his left leg remained unreliable. The memories had not disappeared, and Idella's absence had not become gentle. Nothing had been healed by magic. Sentry stopped in front of him, tail moving once, then turned toward the house. Holt opened the door. The German shepherd followed him inside, his footsteps crossing the wooden floor where silence had lived for years. For the first time in a very long while, someone had waited for Holt to come home. And for the first time, Holt allowed himself to believe that home had been waiting too. Sometimes healing does not mean forgetting the one we lost. It means carrying their love forward, leaving the light on, and choosing not to abandon the life still waiting for us. Perhaps God's gentlest grace is found in those small companions who keep calling us home when grief tells us there is nowhere left to return. If this story touched your heart, share what it meant to you in the comments, and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and hope. May peace find you, and may you always have a light guiding you home.